It's no secret that licensed games have a reputation for, let's charitably call it mediocrity. But they're not all soulless tie-ins desperate to capitalize on the success of whatever IP the developer happens to have landed. After all, for every infamous bomb like E.T. or Colonial Marines, there's an Arkham City or The Witcher. And to that end, here are 9 licensed games that were actually pretty solid. And 5 that, well, weren't. Releasing loosely alongside the Edgar Wright movie based on the manga of the same name, Ubisoft's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the Game was a retro-y beat-em-up that pit you and up to 3 friends against all 7 of Ramona Flower's 7 evil exes. And a bunch of random thugs, club kids, and ninjas, all in a style that mixed the manga with some of our favorite old-school side-scrollers. America's favorite dysfunctional TV family are no strangers to licensed games, and none are better than 2003's Hit and Run. Capitalizing on the success of open-world driving games like GTA or Driver, Hit and Run may not offer a geographically accurate representation of Springfield, but it's chock full of references and horrifying 3D renders of your favorite characters for you to meet, and then run over.
It was like that when I got here.
There are lots of Star Wars games. Some have been truly awful, but the Jedi Knight series still sits among the best licensed games of all time. A sequel to the 1994 Doom clone Dark Forces, the first Jedi Knight took series hero Kyle Katarn, the real hero who stole the first Death Star plans, from definitely not just a knockoff Han Solo to a full-fledged Jedi Master and good buddy to Luke Skywalker himself. It was one of the first games that allowed us to use a lightsaber and arguably did the best job of enabling our Force-based power fantasies out of any Star Wars game to date. It's just a real shame that they erased Kyle's legacy with Rogue One.
She never used to send pros like us out on blue milk runs like this.
Next up is another throwback to the 90s. The movie may be so bad it's good, but the game based on the movie based on the game is unsurprisingly just bad. Its developers weren't even the same as the original game, rather a company whose biggest name to date had been DuckTales on the Apple II. While there was some novelty to being able to fight Golden Globe winner Raul Julia as Jean-Claude Van Damme, Blanco was just a dude with orange hair and cargo shorts, and that kind of feels like a pretty appropriate analogy for this game. With series creators Trey Parker and Matt Stone lending both their voices and their wits to the developers of this turn-based RPG, it's no surprise that it wasn't a flop. About as close as you could get to actually entering an episode of the show, the Stick of Truth lets you become a citizen of South Park in a way that nothing had before.
Paladin, are you sure the Bard is hiding out in there?
That's what Twitter says.
Carrier Raven, Butters!
Sorry.
The great-granddaddy of console shooters, 1997's Goldeneye cemented its spot in the gaming pantheon with then state-of-the-art graphics and gameplay, and ushered in a new era of split-screen multiplayer that proved an FPS on home consoles was no longer a pipe dream. Sure, it may have resulted in untold numbers of fights started over who did or didn't get to play as Oddjob, and heralded decades of bad Bond games to come, but we'll never forget our first. Also on the N64, have you ever wanted to be the Man of Steel? Well, now you can! Experience all the power of the last son of Krypton, like flying through rings, and flying through more rings, and punching unrendered character models. Seriously, it's riddled with bugs and poorly designed from top to bottom. Superman 64 may be the worst superhero game ever made. On the other side of the hero coin, while the movie may have been a god-awful mess, the tie-in game for X-Men Origins Wolverine is secretly one of the best superhero games out there. It nails the feeling of being Wolverine better than any game before it, right down to the regenerating wounds and absurdly violent nature of his powers. You can even unlock his classic yellow and blue outfit to really make that snikt pop. Speaking of ultra-violent movie games, if there's one movie franchise you'd think would be easy to translate into at least a passable FPS, it'd be Rambo, right? Well, apparently not, as this 2014, yes that's 2014, for a Rambo game, is just a super boring rail shooter like you'd find in a bowling alley arcade in the mid-90s, except you had to pay $60 for it and it didn't even work right with your Xbox controller or mouse and keyboard setup. At that point, I'd rather just go bowling. Some licensed games provide faithful recreations of their IP's most iconic moments and characters. Def Jam Fight for New York is not one of them. Instead, it takes all of your favorite stars from the hip-hop and rap scene and makes them fight, casting them in a bizarre yet really compelling story about 2 gangs fighting to control Manhattan. It's not a formula that you might expect would work, but it does. And you also get to play as Snoop Dogg or Ice-T, who are also both ninjas, so win-win. TellTale's The Walking Dead may not have ended as strongly as it began, but man, we will never forget that first season. Clementine and Lee proved to the modern age that you could tell a story in an existing world without relying on famous characters or plot hooks to prop it up, and that you could even introduce new characters who would become just as iconic as their silver-screened counterparts. Unfortunately, not all the Walking Dead games have been gems. In fact, most of them have been decidedly subpar, none more so than 2013's Survival Instincts. Despite having the voice and likeness of both Michael Rooker and Norman Reedus, the game drowned in its muddy graphics and buggy, overly simplistic mechanics. There are far better ways to survive the zombie apocalypse than this. You'd think a game about a radioactive dinosaur spending its days destroying cities and fighting other monsters and robot versions of itself would be a surefire good time, but you'd be wrong. 2015's Godzilla game had weird, clunky controls, moved at a snail's pace, and looked like it should have come out on PS2. If you were looking for a game that replicated the feeling of being a sweaty teamster in a rubber suit, this is it. But that's about as close to becoming the king of monsters as it'll take you. Whether because it launched on the same day as one of the biggest releases in the history of gaming, or simply because people were just road warriored out after that year's blockbuster Fury Road, Avalanche's Mad Max remains one of the most criminally overlooked games of the generation. Their take on the world after the Water Wars offered a beautifully rendered hellscape, some excellent customization and reward systems, and unparalleled vehicular combat. Warner Brothers, if for some reason you happen to be watching this, please, I beg you, give us a sequel and throw in that cool Nemesis system of yours. What are some licensed games that you think hit or missed the mark? Let us know in the comments below. For all your other gaming needs, licensed or otherwise, stick around right here on IGN.